Prepare to be swept into a world where money, passion, and betrayal collide in the most shocking way imaginable. Meet Jonathan Kingsley, a magnetic millionaire who seemed to have it all: a luxurious lifestyle, a beaming wife carrying his unborn child, and endless opportunities at his fingertips. Then one fateful day, everything changed when Jonathan made a catastrophic choice between love and lust. In a single heartbeat, his pregnant wife vanished without a trace. Now haunted by his decision and desperate to right his wrongs, he embarks on a high-stakes search that will unravel long-buried secrets, push loyalties to their limit, and threaten to shatter everything he thought he knew. The story begins on the glittering hills of Bel Air in Los Angeles, where opulent mansions dot the landscape like a living tapestry of wealth. Jonathan Kingsley, at the center of this grand stage, built his fortune through a series of high-stakes real estate deals that started in the late 2000s. With an audacious vision and a knack for timing, he bought foreclosed properties at rock-bottom prices during the economic downturn, and flipped them for millions. His name became synonymous with lavish galas, exclusive clubs, and philanthropic events that guaranteed him front-page coverage in magazines like Forbes and Vanity Fair. People whispered about his influence in hushed tones. They said he once struck a deal on a private jet with Mark Cuban, securing a prime piece of Dallas real estate while sipping champagne. Others recounted how he dined alongside media moguls at Nobu in Malibu, forging connections with the world's most powerful. He was a man who had everything, but never seemed to have enough. Underneath his polished exterior, however, Jonathan had demons of his own. Having grown up in a modest home in Bakersfield, he'd spent his youth underestimating himself. He watched his parents struggle with bills, always determined to break free from that cycle of financial stress. Over the years, he built walls around his insecurities, using expensive suits and lavish cars to project confidence he often didn't feel. An inner restlessness simmered beneath the surface of his success, feeding a hunger for more success, more recognition, more validation. And then came love, or at least what Jonathan believed to be love. 4 years before our story truly begins, he met Serena Diaz, an elegant, soft-spoken woman who had an unassuming charm. She was a creative consultant for a boutique interior design firm. They crossed paths at a fundraiser aimed at rehabilitating Los Angeles youth through art programs. Instantly, Jonathan was captivated by the grace with which she carried herself. Serena moved through the crowd without pretense, a fresh breeze amidst the stifling air of money and power. It wasn't long before they were inseparable. In a private ceremony at Jonathan's estate in the Hollywood Hills, they exchanged vows. Those who witnessed the wedding saw a rare softness in Jonathan's eyes, something that hinted at genuine devotion. No one, least of all Serena, could have predicted the storm that lay ahead. Serena Diaz Kingsley had grown up in a middle-class family in Pasadena. Unlike Jonathan, she was no stranger to comfort, but never experienced extravagance. Her parents were supportive and kind, instilling in her values that emphasized integrity, empathy, and creativity over material wealth. She'd spent her 20s exploring artistic pursuits, dabbling in interior design, and eventually finding her niche in conceptual styling for boutique hotels. Life, she believed, was about forming genuine connections and ensuring her work brought warmth and beauty into people's lives. When she met Jonathan, his world dazzled her, but it was his ambition that truly intrigued her. Serena found his drive, his confidence, and his ability to walk into a room and own it fascinating. At the same time, she sensed an undercurrent of vulnerability in him. He carried an unspoken fear of losing everything, a trait that contradicted his outward display of affluence. She saw something redeemable in that vulnerability, a reason to stand by his side and help soothe his insecurities. The early years of their marriage were sweet. Serena continued working, blending her passion for design with philanthropic projects. While Jonathan jetted off to New York, London, and Dubai for deals, she stayed back to keep their home a place of warmth. Late at night, Jonathan would call her from across the globe, speaking about how much he missed her voice. They would plan future vacations and dream about starting a family. However, after a few years, the dynamics began to shift. Jonathan's empire grew larger, and with every triumphant deal she felt him drifting away. Social engagements became more extravagant, and he began surrounding himself with people whose names flashed in tabloids and business journals. Serena soon realized she was often just a face in the background when he posed for paparazzi photos at red carpet events. Yet she never lost hope. She believed in patience and perseverance, and she valued the sanctity of their marriage vows. She wanted to start a family, believing it might anchor them to the simpler joys in life. So when she discovered she was pregnant, her heart soared with anticipation. Little did she know that this beautiful news would coincide with one of the darkest chapters of her life, when a stranger would weave her way into Jonathan's heart and threaten to destroy everything Serena held dear. Bianca Moretti was a public relations specialist, known for her striking looks and razor-sharp mind. She had built her career promoting high-profile charities and celebrity causes. Through her relentless hustle, she gained access to some of Los Angeles's wealthiest circles. She crossed paths with Jonathan Kingsley during a cocktail event where she was managing publicity for a new Hollywood charity aimed at supporting cancer research. That evening, Jonathan watched her from across the ballroom. She moved gracefully among the attendees, from minor TV personalities to major film producers, ensuring everyone felt noticed. She had a gift for making people crave her attention. Dressed in an elegant black cocktail dress, Bianca possessed a mesmerizing confidence, one that to Jonathan seemed unattainable, yet irresistible. He approached her, and they exchanged pleasantries. Their conversation began innocently enough. She complimented his philanthropic work. He praised her adept skill in event management. But beneath each polite phrase glimmered a spark neither could ignore. Bianca asked him a few questions. Pointed, personal questions about his background, his passions, his fears. Caught off guard, Jonathan revealed a side of himself he rarely shared, even with those closest to him. Their paths intersected again at subsequent events. At first, the connection remained professional. Bianca pitched ideas for raising Jonathan's public image and boosting his philanthropic brand. Jonathan, impressed by her creativity, hired her to manage promotional efforts for his foundation. She attended his business meetings, orchestrated press releases, and set up interviews that showcased Jonathan's charitable endeavors. More time together meant more opportunities for their unspoken attraction to gain momentum. Before long, the boundaries blurred. Dinner meetings extended late into the night. Glances became intimate and casual touches lingered. Jonathan's heart pounded with exhilaration mixed with guilt. He was a married man. He'd vowed loyalty to Serena. But something about Bianca's spark drew him in like a moth to a flame. She was ambitious, adventurous, and fiercely independent, qualities that mirrored his own relentless spirit. Rumors began swirling among Jonathan's associates. People whispered about private dinners at upscale restaurants, discreet weekend getaways to five-star hotels in Beverly Hills. Bianca appeared on Jonathan's arm at certain functions, though carefully spun as his new PR guru. Meanwhile, Serena was home quietly tending to her burgeoning pregnancy and longing for Jonathan's time and attention. The seeds of betrayal had taken root, and a tempest was gathering in the shadows. Word of Jonathan's increasingly frequent absences reached Serena through subtle clues. He started coming home later than usual. He'd cancelled date nights, citing sudden work emergencies and last-minute media crises. Feeling a mix of concern and dread, Serena tried to convince herself that his business truly required such attention. After all, empires don't build themselves. Yet her instincts told her something else was at play. Her pregnancy brought a heightened sensitivity. During her first trimester, she tried to share the little milestones, her cravings, her morning sickness, her joys, only to receive half-hearted responses from Jonathan. More often than not, he seemed distracted. He'd stare at his phone during conversations, texting with someone he wouldn't name. At dinner, he'd sit with a forced smile, his mind obviously somewhere else. One evening, she decided to approach him gently, talking about their future. She asked about baby names, the color scheme for the nursery, maybe scheduling a visit with her parents. Jonathan's eyes flickered with momentary guilt, but he forced a reassuring smile and said all the right words. Yes, we'll start planning soon. Yes, it's all going to be wonderful. His tone, however, was hollow. Serena felt it deep in her bones. Elsewhere, Bianca Moretti escalated her involvement in Jonathan's world. She had a pitch for everything. Philanthropic collaborations, social media strategies, even image makeovers to keep Jonathan in the limelight as a philanthropic millionaire. The more she contributed, the more Jonathan recognized her as essential to his public persona. With each passing day, his reliance on Bianca grew, and so did the emotional entanglement that bound them. Finally, Serena began to suspect infidelity. Late one night, unable to sleep, she walked into Jonathan's home office. He was on a video call, his expression riddled with emotions she couldn't place. When he noticed her by the door, he quickly ended the call. The abruptness, the flicker of panic in his eyes was the first tangible evidence that something was seriously amiss. She asked who he was talking to. He mumbled about work colleagues in New York, but the tension in his posture screamed a different story. Serena spent the rest of that night awake in bed, clutching her pregnancy pillow, tears silently staining her cheeks. She thought back to their wedding vows, to the man she believed Jonathan was. It felt like the ground beneath her feet had cracked wide open. A storm was on the horizon, and the foundation of her marriage was on the verge of collapse. When the tension could no longer be denied, Serena took a bold step. She confronted Jonathan one afternoon in their sunlit living room. A soft breeze blew through the open balcony doors, but the atmosphere was anything but calming. Serena spoke quietly yet firmly, her voice trembling with equal parts fear and resolve. She demanded honesty. I need you to tell me what's going on. If there's someone else, if you're not in this marriage anymore, tell me now. Jonathan turned pale, his carefully crafted facade wavering. Part of him wanted to deny everything, to make empty promises to reassure her, like he always did. But guilt gnawed at him. He couldn't meet Serena's gaze. Instead, he stared at the polished marble floor, a symbol of the wealth that was supposed to bring him happiness. In a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted that he'd become closer than appropriate with Bianca. He framed it as if it were an emotional entanglement, not a full-blown affair. But the words stung all the same. Serena's eyes welled with tears. A swirl of emotions roiled within her betrayal, heartbreak, and disbelief. They had promised each other forever, and now she was carrying his child. How could he risk everything for a fleeting thrill? She told him plainly, She wouldn't compete for his love or his loyalty. Either he ended whatever was happening with Bianca and reaffirmed his commitment to their marriage, or Serena would walk away. Jonathan stood there, arms crossed defensively, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. He felt trapped. On one side was the life he'd built with Serena, a marriage that had once grounded him. On the other side was the exhilarating newness of Bianca, a woman who understood his world of press releases and star-studded events, who never asked him to slow down. For a moment, silence hung between them as thick and suffocating as the humid summer air. Then, in a move that would alter both their destinies, Jonathan said something that Serena never anticipated. "I can't just let Bianca go. Not now." The words cut through the room like a blade. It wasn't that he overtly chose Bianca over Serena, but he couldn't promise to break ties with her either. As tears streamed down Serena's face, she slowly stood her hand protectively over her stomach. She gave Jonathan a final look of heartbreak and said, "I deserve better, and so does our child." 3 days passed in a tense stalemate. Serena stayed in a guest room, avoiding Jonathan except for the most necessary conversations. Each time they crossed paths, sorrow, anger, and unspoken words choked the air. Meanwhile, Jonathan buried himself in work, which was in reality an attempt to avoid facing the guilt and repercussions of his actions. He spent long hours at his downtown office, ironically telling himself he was doing it for the future of his family, if there was to be a future at all. But on the 4th morning, Jonathan woke to an eerie silence. Serena's guest room door stood ajar. He called her name once, twice, receiving no reply. The bed was neatly made, her belongings gone. Alarmed, he dashed through the penthouse, checking every room, but Serena was nowhere to be found. He called her phone, only to hear a cold, automated voice telling him the line was out of service. Panicking, he ran to the garage, discovering her car still there, but a few pieces of her luggage were missing. He rifled through the desk in the foyer, searching for any clue, a note, a message, anything. Nothing. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. Dread clenched his stomach. She was pregnant after all. Where could she possibly go in her condition, and why had she left so abruptly? Hours later, after calling Serena's parents and closest friends, he found that none of them had heard from her. Her mother, worried sick, pleaded with Jonathan for answers, but he had none to give. It was then that reality sank in. Serena was truly gone, and he had no idea where she might be. Days stretched into weeks. Jonathan began to realize the gravity of his mistake. The emptiness in the penthouse gnawed at him. No more gentle laughter in the living room. No faint hum of Serena's favorite jazz tunes at breakfast. No daily updates about the baby. In his silent torment, he reached out to private investigators, scoured her favorite haunts, even visited local hospitals in case she'd sought medical care. But Serena had left no trace. The media soon caught wind of the unfolding drama. Tabloid headlines screamed billionaire mogul's pregnant wife missing and trouble in paradise the mistress. The marriage and the mysterious disappearance. Jonathan found himself hounded by paparazzi, forcing him to slip in and out of his own home, as though he were the fugitive. The once unshakable man was unraveling, and for the first time in his life, all the money in the world couldn't solve his problems. Frustrated and desperate, Jonathan hired Nathan Cole, a renowned private investigator, known for finding people who didn't want to be found. With a reputation built on solving high-profile missing person cases, Cole was rumored to have a network of informants across state lines, from small-town motel clerks to city cab drivers, who owed him favors. Sitting in Jonathan's opulent office, a space decked out with floor-to-ceiling windows and a panoramic view of the Los Angeles skyline, Cole studied Serena's photograph. His eyes lingered on her gentle smile and the subtle bump visible under her blouse. He asked routine questions. Did Serena have a history of running away? Was there any sign of mental distress, substance abuse, or hidden secrets? Jonathan answered as best he could, feeling an odd blend of shame and urgency. Cole began his investigation methodically. He visited local boutiques Serena frequented, discreetly questioning the staff. He combed through surveillance footage from the garage of Jonathan's building, but the camera angles missed the corridor that led to the elevators, leaving many unanswered questions. He checked flight manifests for LAX Burbank and smaller private airports in case Serena had used a chartered plane. Still, there were no leads that panned out. Meanwhile, Jonathan's inner circle began to fracture. His associates exchanged uneasy glances when he walked into meetings. Some whispered that he'd lost his edge. Others spread rumors he was too distraught to handle negotiations effectively. Calls from major clients piled up, but Jonathan struggled to maintain focus. His mind was consumed with worry over Serena. Would she come back? Would she forgive him? And what about the child? Would he ever hold his son or daughter in his arms? Bianca attempted to console him, stepping in to manage his public appearances. She tried to comfort him with claims that Serena just needs time, or she'll turn up once she's calmed down. But Jonathan found her words hollow. His guilt about Serena overshadowed his once fiery infatuation for Bianca. Each time Bianca touched his arm or tried to initiate closeness, Jonathan recoiled. He was haunted by the knowledge that his connection to Bianca had ignited this entire ordeal. Despite the dead ends, Cole refused to back down. He spent late nights analyzing phone records and credit card statements. One evening, he found a puzzling clue, a small charge on Serena's credit card for a motel off a rural highway 2 hours north of Los Angeles. Though the bill had already been paid and the card cancelled, it was the first tangible lead. Cole planned his next move. Jonathan, clinging to a shred of hope, prepared to follow any trail, no matter how faint, if it meant bringing Serena home. Nathan Cole traced the motel charge to a nondescript establishment called Twin Pines Lodge, nestled in the quiet outskirts of a small town called Crescent Falls. It was the last place anyone would expect a woman of Serena's tastes and background to stay. Determined to uncover the truth, Cole drove out at dusk, wanting to slip in unnoticed. Upon arrival, he found the lodge a worn-down building with flickering neon lights. Its gravel parking lot held a few pickup trucks, a dusty SUV, and a battered motorcycle. Cole checked in under an alias, then discreetly questioned the night clerk, a chain-smoking woman with tired eyes, who remembered seeing someone matching Serena's description about a week earlier. She recalled Serena arriving alone, wearing large sunglasses and paying in cash for a single night. The woman said Serena seemed nervous, checking over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow her. Cole's next steps involved canvassing the area. He examined local diners, gas stations, and bus terminals for any sign of Serena. At a corner store, an elderly cashier remembered Serena stopping in to buy bottled water and prenatal vitamins. This shred of information both relieved and concerned Cole. At least Serena was still taking care of her pregnancy, but why here? In the middle of nowhere, while Cole gathered these fragments of Serena's recent past, Jonathan's life in Los Angeles spiraled further. Shareholders in his real estate empire were getting restless. They questioned his mental fitness, his capacity to steer the company. Jonathan tried to keep up a front of calm professionalism, but his performance faltered. He missed meetings, made poor decisions, and even broke down in front of a longtime friend, investor Caleb Whitmore, after a particularly grueling conference call. Jonathan admitted he feared losing not just his fortune, but his wife and unborn child. Caleb, who had once admired Jonathan's resilience, now saw a man unraveling under the weight of guilt. Meanwhile, Bianca was not content playing the role of patient supporter. She wanted a decision from Jonathan about their relationship, some affirmation that her sacrifices for him hadn't been in vain. The tabloids had begun referencing her as the other woman, tarnishing her own reputation in PR circles. She started pressuring Jonathan to come forward with the truth, maybe even orchestrate a media statement clarifying the situation. But Jonathan, consumed by his frantic search for Serena, pushed Bianca away. Their once alluring connection soured into arguments, resentment, and frustration. As the secrets and clues slowly unraveled, one thing became clear. Serena had intentionally stepped away from the life she'd built with Jonathan. But how far was she willing to go? And for how long? Cole knew he was close to answers. Yet a sinking feeling warned him that the deeper he dug, the more painful the truths would become for everyone involved. With the investigation progressing in fits and starts, Serena's parents, Hector and Marisol Diaz, decided they could no longer stand by waiting anxiously in Pasadena. They demanded a face-to-face meeting with Jonathan. Sitting in the couple's cozy living room, surrounded by framed photographs of a smiling Serena from her childhood to her college days, Jonathan found himself at a loss for words. Hector, typically a gentleman, glared at Jonathan with quiet fury. He spoke in a controlled voice, each word a blade of disappointment. "You promised to take care of our daughter, and you promised to cherish her. Where is she now?" Marisol, eyes red from days of crying, refused to meet Jonathan's gaze. She was furious and heartbroken at the same time. Jonathan, swallowing hard, explained everything he knew that Serena had left of her own accord and was seemingly in hiding. He didn't attempt to sugarcoat his role in driving her away. He took responsibility for the affair, though the words still caught in his throat. Shaken by the confrontation, Jonathan turned to someone he'd once trusted with his life, his longtime mentor, an older real estate magnate named Edward Tully. Edward had guided Jonathan through his first major deals, instilling the importance of integrity and smart decision-making. But they had grown distant when Jonathan's star rose, overshadowing Edward's achievements. Over lunch at the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills, Jonathan laid it all out. How he had let success go to his head, how he'd neglected Serena, and how his involvement with Bianca spiraled out of control. Edward listened, sipping his green tea, eyes solemn. "Money can be a curse when it blinds you to what truly matters," he said, leaning forward. "If you want to find Serena, you need to show her she's still the priority. She has to know you're willing to face the consequences, even if it means losing your fortune." The old man's words echoed like a prophecy, forcing Jonathan to consider if he was truly willing to risk everything to regain Serena's trust and safeguard their unborn child. The renewed support from Serena's parents, albeit strained, and the wise counsel from Edward Tully gave Jonathan a glimmer of hope. He renewed his contract with Nathan Cole, doubling the investigators' resources. If Serena was out there in rural motels or small towns, Cole would find her, or at least chase down every lead possible. Yet time continued to pass with no sign of her, and each ticking day felt like a countdown to an unknown fate. While Jonathan and Cole hunted for her, Serena found refuge in an unremarkable coastal town named Seabrook Bay, about 3 hours north of Los Angeles. She chose it precisely because it was nothing like the glitzy world she'd left behind. The town's main street featured a local bakery, a second-hand bookstore, and a small community clinic. A battered wooden pier extended into the ocean, where fishermen cast lines for their daily catch. Tourists were few, and anonymity was easy to maintain. Serena felt a wave of relief when she arrived, but heartbreak clung to her like a shadow. Every morning she'd walk along the shoreline, the salty breeze calming her troubled mind. She couldn't entirely forget Jonathan, or the life they once shared. The memory of their laughter, the joy of discovering she was pregnant, and the dreams of raising a family together played on repeat in her mind. Yet those memories stood in stark contrast to the betrayal that drove her away. She rented a small furnished cottage with the last of her savings, using an alias to avoid detection. A kind elderly landlord, Mrs. Thompson, accepted her without asking too many questions, though she sometimes looked at Serena with gentle curiosity. Serena took care to hide the signs of her pregnancy, wearing loose-fitting clothes and a baseball cap. She knew she couldn't conceal it forever, but every day gained was another day she could spend away from the storm she had left behind. Though she missed her parents terribly, she avoided contacting them, fearing they'd reveal her location to Jonathan. She still loved her husband, hated that she did, but believed she had to protect herself and her unborn child from further hurt. In quiet moments, she'd wonder if she was punishing the baby by denying them a father's presence. Yet the sting of Jonathan's betrayal was too raw. One afternoon, as she browsed the shelves of the local bookstore, she felt a sudden flutter in her belly, the baby's first movement. Tears filled her eyes in that quiet space. She tried to imagine Jonathan's reaction if he had been there, sharing in the magic of that instant. But the thought brought pain, a reminder of why she'd vanished in the first place. A storm of conflicting emotions brewed within her. She was determined to stand on her own, but loneliness gnawed at her. And above all, the question loomed, how long could she keep running from a man who was determined to find her? As Jonathan poured resources into finding Serena, Bianca Moretti grew increasingly resentful. Her professional reputation had suffered a major blow. She was now the villain in the public eye, labeled a home wrecker by tabloids and social media gossips. Invitations to high-profile events dwindled, and potential clients hesitated to bring her on board for PR campaigns. After all, who wanted to hire a scandal magnate? Bianca's frustration didn't end there. She felt abandoned by Jonathan, who had once been enthralled by her ambition and allure. Now he barely responded to her texts and calls, treating her more like a business acquaintance than a lover. She told herself she deserved better, someone who would appreciate her cunning and brilliance. Yet she couldn't deny that she had banked on Jonathan's world of influence to further her own. Watching him spiral with guilt and heartbreak over Serena was a bitter pill to swallow. In a desperate move, Bianca began orchestrating press releases and online stories designed to shift public sympathy. She anonymously fed information to a gossip blog, painting herself as a supportive figure who had fallen in love with an emotionally distant millionaire. Some pieces implied that Jonathan's marriage to Serena was already on the rocks before Bianca appeared, hinting that Serena's disappearance might be an overreaction, or worse, an attempt to manipulate Jonathan's wealth. Jonathan was livid when he discovered the articles. He recognized Bianca's handiwork, her style of spinning narratives to shape public opinion. Confronting her in a tense encounter at a private lounge, he demanded she back off. She retorted that she was merely protecting her career, while he was busy chasing a wife who had run away. Tempers flared, resulting in heated words that could never be taken back. Jonathan left jaw-clenched, anger boiling in his veins. He realized how far Bianca would go to cling to the life she had envisioned for herself. In the aftermath, Bianca quietly nurtured a new plan. She considered making direct contact with Serena, if only to push her out of the picture for good. She believed Jonathan would eventually see reason return to her side, and perhaps even publicly declare his commitment if Serena stayed out of the equation. The idea was risky, bordering on reckless, but Bianca was not one to let opportunities slip by. Her agenda was simple: remove every obstacle between her and the power she craved, even if it meant crossing a line that might lead to irreversible consequences. In the quiet coastal town of Seabrook Bay, Serena had finally begun to breathe again. The rhythms of her days, morning walks along the shore, quiet afternoons reading at the local bookstore, and evenings sketching design ideas offered a semblance of peace. Though shadows still lingered from her past life, she had carved out a temporary refuge, hoping time would give her clarity. But peace, she would soon learn, is fragile. One afternoon, while retrieving her mail from the creaky metal box at the end of the cottage's gravel path, she noticed an envelope addressed to her real name, Serena Kingsley. No return address, no markings, just her name in crisp typed letters. Her heart dropped. She tore it open cautiously. Inside was a single sheet of paper printed with a short message in bold font: "Jonathan is searching for you. He claims he'll do anything to bring you home. Think twice about trusting him." That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just those two cryptic sentences. Panic surged through her. No one in Seabrook Bay knew her real name. She'd been careful to use an alias, pay in cash, and keep a low profile. Someone had broken through that barrier. Someone had found her. She rushed inside, double-checking the locks, peeking through the windows. Her mind spun in circles. Was it Jonathan? Had he found her? Or was it Bianca that seemed more likely? Serena could almost feel the cold claws of that woman reaching through the paper, trying to manipulate her from afar. The letter ignited a torrent of fear and doubt. She considered running again, leaving Seabrook Bay, changing her name once more, disappearing into the wind. But a part of her, perhaps the one still tethered to Jonathan by the growing life inside her, hesitated. That same night, nearly 200 miles south, Nathan Cole sat in his dimly lit office, reviewing a stack of airport surveillance footage on his tablet. He'd spent weeks following digital breadcrumbs, credit card charges, gas station security feeds, and rental car agreements. Most of it had led nowhere. But then he saw her. A woman matching Serena's description appeared at a regional airport just outside Los Angeles. Though she wore sunglasses and a scarf, Cole caught a brief but clear profile shot from a security camera. It was her. He was certain of it. Further tracking led him to a rental car, returned at a service station north of the city. The final receipt pointed toward Seabrook Bay. He picked up the phone and called Jonathan, who was in the middle of yet another restless night. "I think we've got her," Cole said. Seabrook Bay. Quiet little town. Fits the pattern off-grid coastal, no major press. "You need to move fast." Jonathan's chest tightened. Hope and dread churned together. "I'll leave at first light," he said. Unbeknownst to them, Bianca was already 3 steps ahead. Through her carefully preserved network of contacts, an assistant at a media firm, a concierge from a gala in Malibu, even a driver she tipped handsomely, she had kept tabs on Jonathan's activities. When word reached her that he was heading north, she knew instantly where he was going. Fury burned in her chest, but not just from jealousy. To her, this was betrayal. She had gambled everything on Jonathan, her reputation, her client list, her public image, and he had the audacity to chase after the very woman who had abandoned him. She wouldn't let it happen. Bianca made a call to a man she'd used once before, a fixer with no moral compass, only a price. "There's a woman I need you to find," she said coolly. "She's pregnant. Quiet. Goes by an alias. She's hiding in Seabrook Bay." "Observation only," the man asked. "For now," she replied. "I just want to be the first one to reach her. And when I do, I'll make sure Jonathan never looks at her the same again." As dawn approached, 3 lives moved toward collision. Serena with her fear and doubt, Jonathan with his desperate longing to make things right, and Bianca with her ruthless need to reclaim control. All roads led to Seabrook Bay, and none of them would leave unchanged. Jonathan arrived in Seabrook Bay under a haze of anxiety and fragile hope. The ocean air, thick with salt and fog, wrapped around him like a veil, blurring the contrast between the life he'd left in Los Angeles and the uncertain path ahead. He parked his sleek black SUV near the town's weathered pier and looked wildly out of place in his designer suit. The town moved slowly. Locals walked dogs, sipped coffee on porches, and paid him curious, fleeting glances. Determined, he began asking around. At a quiet corner cafe, he showed a barista Serena's photo. The young man's eyes widened slightly. "Yeah, I've seen her," he said. "She comes in for peppermint tea. Always alone. Always writing something in a little notebook." Jonathan's chest tightened. So she was really here. 1,000 imagined scenarios rushed through his mind, but none felt real until now. Following vague directions, he navigated through winding residential streets until he reached a modest lane shaded by flowering jacaranda trees. At the far end stood a small green cottage with chipped paint and a white picket fence, a picture of peace and simplicity. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. It was the kind of home Serena would choose, quiet, humble, full of life, without opulence. He approached the door slowly, rehearsing 100 apologies, declarations, and explanations. Before he could knock, the door opened. There she was. Serena stood in the doorway, disheveled but glowing, in a way that stunned him more alive than he remembered. Her belly, pronounced and unmistakable, immediately brought tears to Jonathan's eyes. She froze. How did you find me?" Her voice trembled, caught between fear and anger. "I had to," he whispered. "I needed to tell you in person. I'm sorry, Serena. I was a fool. I've made every mistake a man could make. But I'm here because I want to fix this us." Serena hesitated. Against every instinct, she let him inside. The air inside the cottage was thick with tension. Jonathan looked around at the cozy space touched by signs of her solitude. Half-read books, a sketch pad on the table, a bowl of fruit slowly ripening on the counter. "I've missed you," he said softly. "I've missed everything we could still be." She folded her arms. "You said that before, Jonathan. Then you chose someone else." He stepped closer. "I didn't choose her. I got lost. I got consumed by who I thought I had to be. But that man, he's gone. You and the baby. You're my only priority now." Tears welled in Serena's eyes, but before she could reply, the door burst open with a force that made them both flinch. Bianca stood there, her face flushed with rage, her heels sinking into the welcome mat. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, voice dripping with venom. Jonathan spun around, shocked. "Bianca, what the hell are you doing here?" She stepped inside, uninvited. You didn't think I'd let you disappear without answers. I gave up everything for you. My clients, my reputation, all for a man who runs back to the woman who left him." Serena squared her shoulders, her hand protectively on her stomach. "You need to leave." Bianca's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to order me around. You played the victim vanished, and now expect him to fall back into your arms." Jonathan raised his voice for the first time. "Enough. This is my fault, not hers. You should never have come here." Bianca looked at Serena's belly and visibly recoiled. "So it's true," she murmured. "You're really having his baby." Serena met her gaze. "I was his wife long before you entered the picture. I never needed power. I just needed honesty." Bianca laughed bitterly. "And you think he's suddenly found it?" Jonathan turned to her, his voice firm. "Bianca, we're done. We've been done. Please go." There was a flicker of pain in Bianca's expression, quickly masked by contempt. Without another word, she stormed out the door, slamming behind her like a gunshot. Silence returned. Jonathan and Serena stood in the middle of the small room, their hearts pounding. No more lies, no more masks. Just two broken people facing the truth at last. The storm outside began to roll in rain, pattering against the window panes. But inside the cottage, a fragile stillness remained a moment, suspended in time, holding both the possibility of healing and the risk of collapse. The door had barely stopped rattling after Bianca's dramatic exit, when silence fell like a curtain over the cottage. The tension, thick and raw, lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Jonathan stood still, unsure whether to approach Serena or give her the space her eyes seemed to plead for. Serena herself was trembling, not just from the confrontation, but from the sheer weight of everything that had led to this moment. She sat slowly on the edge of the sofa, one hand resting protectively over her belly, the other wiping away a stray tear. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling like waves, struggling to find rhythm. Jonathan knelt beside her, keeping his distance. "I never meant for this. Any of this," he said softly. Serena didn't answer right away. She was exhausted, not just physically from pregnancy and hiding and heartache, but emotionally her spirit worn from carrying the burden of betrayal and survival. She looked at Jonathan, really looked at him, seeing beyond the tailored suits and contrite eyes. For the first time in a long while, he looked human, tired, fractured. "I used to wonder," she began, her voice hoarse, "if I did something wrong, if I wasn't exciting enough, powerful enough, glamorous enough for your world." Jonathan shook his head, shame flooding him. "No, it wasn't you, Serena. It was me. I mistook ambition for fulfillment. I let ego blind me. And I broke something sacred between us. You broke me, Jonathan," she said, and her voice cracked under the weight of it. He swallowed hard. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to rebuild what I destroyed. Even if you never take me back, even if I'm nothing more than a co-parent to our child, I need you to know I will never stop making it right." The room went quiet again, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Serena's eyes drifted toward the window, where raindrops began tapping against the glass, slow and rhythmic. It reminded her of those long nights in their mansion, when she would lie awake, hoping Jonathan would come home, only to fall asleep alone. "I'm not the same woman who left Los Angeles," she said, after a long pause. "I had to rebuild myself from the inside out. I learned how to live with less, how to find peace in solitude, I won't trade that hard-earned peace for more heartbreak." "I don't want to take your peace," Jonathan said quietly. "I want to protect it. I want to deserve being a part of your life again." Serena studied him, measuring the sincerity in his voice, the subtle shifts in his expression. She could sense he meant it, though part of her still feared his promises might dissolve the moment pressure returned. "I'm not saying I forgive you yet," she murmured. "But if we're going to even try to find a way forward, we need structure boundaries." He nodded instantly. "Anything you need. I'm ready." "Marriage counseling," she said, "and honesty. No more secrets. Ever." "Agreed," he whispered, his voice steady. "And if you lie to me again, if you ever put me through that pain again, I will disappear, and this time you won't find me." The warning wasn't a threat. It was a vow. One Jonathan took seriously. "I understand," he said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to prove I can be better." A silence settled between them again, but this time it felt different. Not suffocating, but spacious, like the pause between thunder and calm. Serena reached for a blanket and draped it across her lap, nodding towards the kitchen. "There's tea if you want to make some." It was the smallest gesture, but to Jonathan it felt like an open door. He moved quietly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had just been born. As he boiled water, he glanced back at Serena, curled on the couch, eyes closed. Her guard wasn't gone, but it had lowered just enough to let hope breathe. And sometimes hope, however delicate, is all it takes to begin again. In the aftermath of Bianca's stormy exit, Jonathan and Serena were left facing each other in a fragile cocoon of silence. The rain had picked up outside, tapping steadily against the cottage roof, like the sound of a heartbeat, steady, persistent, unsure. Jonathan sat across from Serena, watching her cautiously. She looked so tired but stronger somehow, like a woman who had walked through fire and survived. There was no immediate joy in her expression, no sweeping reunion, only a quiet, strained determination in her eyes, a signal that if he wanted a second chance, he'd have to earn it moment by moment. Their conversation stretched into the evening, not as lovers reunited, but as two parents cautiously exploring a fragile ceasefire. Jonathan didn't hold anything back. He laid himself bare. His fears, his regrets, his realization that the life he'd once built around success and admiration had been hollow without her. "I was chasing everything, but the one thing that mattered most," he said, his voice soft, cracked. "And by the time I realized it, you were gone. I don't blame you for leaving. I blame myself for giving you a reason to." Serena nodded, but said little. She needed to hear his truths, but she wasn't ready to meet them with open arms. Her heart was still tender, still questioning whether change was possible, or if this was just another performance from a man skilled in persuasion. "You said all the right things when we met, Jonathan," she said at last, her voice tinged with sorrow. "And again at the wedding. And every time you promised to come home and didn't. I need actions now, not words." "I know," he whispered. "So let's start with action. Come back with me, but on your terms. Marriage counseling, transparency, boundaries. I want to rebuild this, but only in a way that makes you feel safe." Serena looked away out the window where the rain had softened to a drizzle. "And if you falter," he didn't flinch, "then I lose you forever, and I'll deserve it." That night, Serena lay in bed in the cottage's small guest room, one hand resting on her belly. She thought about her child's future. Could she raise this baby alone if she had to? Yes, But did she want to? If there was even a sliver of possibility that Jonathan could truly change. By morning, she had made a decision, not a surrender, but a tentative truce. When Jonathan woke, he found her seated at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and 2 folded pages in front of her. "These are my conditions," she said, sliding them across. "I'm coming back to LA. But we're doing this on my terms. Weekly therapy. A legal agreement for financial protection. A co-parenting plan in case things fall apart again. I won't be trapped." He read through the list, nodding solemnly. Agreed. Every single point. Later that day, they packed up her things from the cottage. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly landlord, emerged from her porch with a warm, if emotional, farewell. "Take care of her," she said to Jonathan. "She's stronger than she looks, but don't make her fight alone again." As they drove south along the winding Pacific Coast Highway, the silence between them no longer felt sharp. It was cautious, contemplative, but alive. The city skyline came into view hours later, glittering like a kingdom on the edge of redemption. Back in Los Angeles, Jonathan followed through immediately. He called his legal team and arranged for a protective trust in Serena's name. He booked their first joint counseling session and began reorganizing his work schedule to prioritize fatherhood. For once, his empire could wait. Bianca, meanwhile, attempted one final strike, leaking private texts and images to gossip sites in a desperate bid to smear Serena and win Jonathan back through scandal. But this time, Serena stood her ground. Together with Jonathan, she issued a calm, dignified statement to the press that focused not on drama, but growth. To their surprise, the public rallied behind their reconciliation. The narrative had shifted from betrayal to redemption, from tabloid fodder to a story of second chances. Their last scene that week took place in a high-rise therapist's office with sweeping views of downtown Los Angeles. Serena and Jonathan sat side by side, still emotionally scarred, but willing to try. As they opened up to the therapist, their words were clumsy, raw, but real. There were no promises of fairy tales or guarantees, just the flicker of possibility. And sometimes that's where healing begins, not with certainty, but with the courage to try again. In the end, Jonathan Kingsley stood on the precipice of losing everything he thought defined him: wealth, status, pride, only to discover that the real treasure lay in the unwavering love of the family he nearly cast aside. Serena's courageous stand against betrayal led her down a path of self-discovery, proving that sometimes walking away is the only way to find your true worth. Their reunion might be the start of a new chapter or a final goodbye. Only time will tell. If you found yourself caught up in the twists and turns of this tumultuous love triangle, be sure to hit the like button, share this video with friends who crave drama and redemption, and subscribe for more stories that delve into the intricate tapestry of human relationships. Until next time, remember, true wealth can't be measured in money, but in the people who stand by you, no matter what. Harold Davenport was the kind of man the tabloids loved to hate, handsome, wealthy, and never without a scandal. But no one ever expected this particular drama to unfold in the glare of high society's most exclusive restaurant, especially not with his pregnant wife sobbing in the middle of it all. In just one heated moment, Harold shattered more than expensive dinnerware when he delivered a stinging slap across Evelyn's face. Witnesses stood frozen cell phones out, capturing every angle of the betrayal. Within hours, the video went viral, thrusting Harold and the secrets he'd worked so hard to hide straight into the spotlight. Harold Davenport prided himself on two things: his ability to close any business deal and his impeccable public persona. If you walked into the towering glass building that housed Davenport Investments, you'd be greeted by smiling receptionists, crisp-suited assistants, and a portrait of Harold himself that exuded both charm and power. Behind the scenes, he navigated labyrinthine deals with an iron will. He had started from modest beginnings, something he rarely shared openly, to become the city's most lauded real estate mogul. His name peppered the society pages alongside glamorous photos of his equally sophisticated wife, Evelyn Davenport. They appeared to be the epitome of a power couple. Her shining brown eyes and perfectly styled hair spoke of poise and grace, the essential ingredients for playing the role of a millionaire's wife in high society. She was not just a trophy by any means. Evelyn held a master's degree in art history and curated exhibitions for a local gallery. Yet to the outside world, she seemed a mere ornament to Harold's unstoppable ambitions. Harold considered himself unstoppable until recently. He had just received news that Evelyn was pregnant. The idea of fatherhood was supposed to fill him with pride and joy. Instead, it felt like an inconvenient sidetrack to his grander life plan. Children meant cutting down on the lavish parties, the adventurous getaways, and the provocative dinners that often involved far more than just food. On top of that, business had been rocky for the past 6 months. Some said the real estate bubble in certain parts of the city was bursting and Harold was feeling the tremors. But he refused to show weakness. He doubled down on new developments, ignoring the warnings of colleagues. He had built an empire. How could it possibly crumble? Evelyn Davenport stared at the ultrasound photos pinned to her dresser mirror every morning. She was enamored with the tiny life growing inside her, but an undercurrent of dread also ran through her thoughts. Her marriage had once been built on genuine affection, but in recent months, Harold had grown distant. He'd come home late without explanation, skip important doctor appointments, and at times displayed a temper she'd never witnessed in their earlier years. She confided in her best friend, Fiona Bradford, who came from old money and spent her days juggling charity events. Fiona often told her, "Men like Harold are under immense pressure. Try to be more understanding." Evelyn did try. She planned romantic dinners, arranged quiet nights by the fireplace, and even suggested couples therapy. But Harold always brushed her off with a dismissive wave or an outright snub. This pregnancy, though a miracle to her, seemed to irritate Harold in a way she couldn't fully fathom. He was curt whenever she mentioned baby names or asked if he'd help decorate the nursery. Evelyn began taking notes on her phone of every small moment of love he did show, as though hoarding them like rare jewels, holding on to evidence that the man she married still existed. Complicating things further was the swirl of rumors she caught drifting through the city's upper crust. A mistress, some whispered. Others said they'd seen him at questionable venues late at night. She tried to remain hopeful, to keep faith in the vow they had shared. After all, this was the man who'd once whisked her away for a spontaneous trip to Santorini just to watch the sunset on her birthday. Yet she couldn't deny the gnawing feeling in her stomach that something was terribly wrong. Serafina Rossetti was everything a scandalous mistress might be, statuesque, captivating, and dangerously ambitious. She had grown up on the outskirts of Rome, clawing her way out of poverty by using her wit charm and an unrelenting will to transcend her circumstances. Arriving in the city with no connections, she landed a job as a lounge singer in a high-end hotel bar frequented by the wealthy. That's where she first caught Harold's eye. Harold was drawn to Serafina's exotic accent and the allure of the unknown. As her smoky voice caressed the final note of a song, one evening Harold found himself enthralled, He approached her with the confidence of a man used to getting what he wanted. Serafina recognized him immediately. The local tabloids were filled with stories of Harold Davenport, the man who could turn a patch of barren land into a sprawling, money-making enterprise. She pretended not to care about his reputation or fortune, knowing full well how to play the game. Before long, they were meeting in clandestine hotel suites. Harold felt a rush with Serafina that had been absent from his marriage for far too long, at least in his mind. She was exciting and adventurous, feeding his ego in ways he didn't realize he craved. She would whisper how powerful he was, how unstoppable, and how much she admired him. It filled a void he had never acknowledged existed. To Serafina, Harold was a ticket to stability, and possibly much more. She knew the stakes. If she played her cards correctly, she might secure a future that far outshone her modest singing gigs. She feigned ignorance about his personal life, though she followed every development on social media. She told herself that if Harold was unhappy in his marriage, it was his problem to fix. She was simply the prize he deserved. The night it all came crashing down began as an extravagant date at La Belle Étoile, the city's most exclusive French restaurant. It was a place known for its crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and a menu that could make even the most seasoned gourmet swoon. Reservations were nearly impossible to procure. Harold, of course, knew the owner personally and had a private table set aside a lavish corner draped in gold and burgundy, offering both seclusion and prestige. He arrived with Serafina on his arm, and heads turned immediately. She wore an emerald green silk gown that clung to her every curve, while Harold's tailored tux was impeccable. Waiters swooned with deference. The wine steward promptly arrived with an imported bottle of Chateau Margaux vintage 1982, which Harold had pre-ordered at an astronomical price. Serafina loved the attention. She let out a seductive laugh at every mundane remark Harold made, batting her eyelashes as though he were reciting poetry. Little did she know that someone had recognized them. A discreet text was sent, and within minutes gossip started circulating through the upper echelons of the city's social network. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat at home, rubbing her growing belly, wondering yet again why Harold was working so late. She had made calls to the office, but each time an apologetic assistant told her, "Mr. Davenport is still in a meeting." When her phone pinged with a message from an acquaintance that read, "I think you need to see this," accompanied by a grainy photo of Harold and another woman at La Belle Étoile. Evelyn felt her world tilt. Fueled by adrenaline heartbreak and a sense of determination she didn't know she possessed, Evelyn decided she had to see for herself. She hailed a car, ignoring her better judgment and every instinct telling her to stay home. She headed straight for the restaurant, tears threatening to spill from her eyes as she clutched her phone to her chest. When Evelyn arrived at La Belle Étoile, her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the maitre d' asking for her reservation. She spotted Harold almost immediately across the dimly lit room. He was laughing, his face turned toward Serafina. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. It felt surreal, like a nightmare that stubbornly refused to end. She managed to slip past the staff, fueled by raw emotion. She stood trembling at the edge of the table. Her presence was so unexpected that Harold didn't notice her at first. Serafina, however, lifted her eyes and froze. The expression on her face transitioned from smug delight to startled anxiety in a split second. Harold finally caught on. His laughter died, and a hush fell over their little corner of the restaurant. By now, curious diners at nearby tables were craning their necks to see the source of the disruption. Evelyn Harold said, his voice taut, "What are you doing here?" She couldn't quite form coherent words. Her throat felt like sandpaper as she uttered, "So this is how you spend your late nights." Before Harold could respond, Serafina tried to stand, but Evelyn's fierce gaze made her retreat into her seat. Evelyn didn't notice the staff edging closer to intervene or the scattered camera phones that rose from various tables. She only had eyes for Harold, whose face was now marked by anger more than guilt. Seeing the confrontation escalate, the maitre d' approached gently. "Madame, if there's an issue, stay out of this." Harold barked, eyes locked on Evelyn. Tension twisted in the air as onlookers waited, half in dread, half in voyeuristic fascination. Evelyn's hands shook, not with fear, but with a mix of betrayal and heartbreak she could no longer contain. No one could have predicted how swiftly the situation would spiral. Evelyn, tears brimming, whispered, "How could you do this?" "You know I'm pregnant, Harold. I'm carrying your child." Her voice cracked on the last word. Harold looked around painfully, aware that all eyes were on him. The empire he had carefully built on a foundation of public relations and polished appearances now stood on the brink of collapse. In his mind, Evelyn was violating the unspoken rule that all dirty laundry must remain hidden. She had broken the illusion he had painstakingly maintained, and for that, a flicker of rage ignited in him. It was a single impulsive motion. Harold raised his arm and delivered a stinging slap across Evelyn's cheek. The crack of his hand against her skin echoed in the hushed restaurant, shocking everyone into stillness. Evelyn stumbled back, her hand flying to her burning cheek, eyes wide in disbelief and pain. Serafina gasped, and several diners let out shocked cries. One or two even scrambled to stop him, but it was too late. The deed was done. As Evelyn steadied herself, the horrifying reality sank in. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and had just been struck by the man she once believed would protect her from all harm. Then the chaotic aftermath began. Concerned patrons rushed forward, some filming on their phones. A couple of women attempted to console Evelyn, while others shouted at Harold, calling him out for his abuse. Restaurant security threatened to call the police, but Harold, with his connections, somehow dodged immediate trouble. He stood rooted as if he couldn't quite comprehend what he'd done. Serafina was pulling at his arm, begging him to leave before the authorities arrived. Evelyn, tears streaming down her face, could hardly breathe. Her cheek throbbed, and her entire world felt as if it had collapsed in a single slap. The viral storm began even before the night was over. Multiple videos from different angles found their way onto social media platforms: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Within hours, Harold Davenport was trending, accompanied by hashtags like "Justice for Evelyn" and "Stop Domestic Abuse." The public reaction was swift and merciless. Even those who had never heard of Harold Davenport before chimed in, condemning his actions as monstrous. By morning, local news channels picked up the story. Cynthia Morgan, a well-known news anchor, opened the day's broadcast with the scandalous footage. Experts chimed in, psychologists discussing domestic violence, lawyers speculating on potential legal consequences, and business analysts predicting the downfall of Davenport Investments. If there was any doubt that Harold's reputation would weather this storm, it was erased by the sheer volume of denunciation flooding every media outlet. Evelyn, meanwhile, had spent a sleepless night at her friend Fiona's house. She found no peace there, either her phone vibrating constantly with messages of sympathy, outrage, and offers for legal counsel. Paparazzi were already camping out near the gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. It was surreal watching her private pain turned into a public spectacle. Harold woke up to a house that felt empty despite its opulence. News vans crowded the street outside his mansion. Every attempt he made to contact Evelyn was met with silence. Even Serafina tried to call him several times, leaving frantic voicemails, but he ignored them. Harold's PR team scrambled to manage the crisis, urging him to issue a statement apologizing for his actions and expressing contrition. But Harold was too proud and perhaps too shocked to act rationally. He believed he could ride out the storm, just as he had navigated countless controversies before. Late that same day, Harold received the dreaded official notice he was summoned to appear in court the very next morning. It was no longer a matter of social media backlash or public perception. Now he faced real legal consequences. The charge was assault on his pregnant wife, no less. The severity of such an act was enough for the district attorney's office to take immediate action. Bernard Stein, a high-profile defense attorney on Harold's payroll, rushed over to the Davenport mansion as soon as he heard the news. Stein had seen his fair share of celebrity and high society cases, but even he seemed rattled. In the gleaming marble foyer, he told Harold in no uncertain terms, "The footage is everywhere. We can try damage control, but you must appear remorseful and cooperative in court. This isn't a tabloid rumor we can simply squash." Harold seethed at this notion of having to grovel. "I built this empire," he snapped, pacing restlessly, "and I'll be damned if I let it crumble because of one slip. Evelyn. She provoked me. She showed up uninvited, made a scene." Stein cut him off. "Do you hear yourself? That is not a defense. You slapped her. And she's pregnant. The public outcry alone is enough to doom you if we don't handle this very, very carefully." He stressed again the importance of a heartfelt apology, possibly even a settlement, anything to prevent a drawn-out criminal trial. Reluctantly, Harold agreed to follow Stein's guidance, but he refused to see Evelyn or even attempt a direct apology. Pride and anger still clouded his judgment, overshadowing any rational thought. His mind whirled with blame and resentment for Evelyn, for the diners who had filmed him, even for Serafina, whose presence had set the stage for the entire spectacle. While Harold prepared his defensive strategy, Evelyn faced a far more tumultuous emotional storm. She was holed up in Fiona's guest room, drifting between tearful breakdowns and bouts of numbness. Her cheek still bore a faint bruise, and every time she glimpsed her reflection, she felt a jolt of anguish mixed with disbelief. When she placed a hand over her belly, she worried not just for her own future, but for the innocent child growing inside her. Through the door, Fiona tried to coax her with tea-soft music or heartfelt reassurances. Evelyn appreciated the support, but she felt trapped in a nightmare she never asked for. A flurry of phone calls from advocacy groups, lawyers, and journalists only added to the confusion. While some demanded she press charges and make a public statement, others urged her to remember that Harold was a powerful man with the means to retaliate. Even her own parents, who lived in another state, left voicemails begging her to come home away from the media frenzy. Eventually, Evelyn allowed Fiona to connect her with a legal advocate named Janet Morales, who specialized in domestic violence cases. Janet arrived at Fiona's house, a calm, steady presence in the midst of chaos. She explained the legal options available to Evelyn, from restraining orders to possible civil suits. Evelyn listened quietly, feeling the weight of the decisions she needed to make. Her mind wandered to the early days of her relationship with Harold, their honeymoon in Bali, the nights they spent dreaming about their future, the moment they decided to try for a child. Each memory felt like a shard of broken glass, once whole and dazzling, now painful and scattered. Still, a determination flickered in her eyes. She wasn't just a victim. She was a mother, and she needed to protect herself and her unborn child, even if it meant taking the man she once loved to court. The next morning, the courthouse was abuzz with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. Police barricades lined the steps leading to the main entrance, where a swarm of media personnel jockeyed for the best vantage point. When Harold arrived in his sleek black sedan, he was greeted with an onslaught of camera flashes and shouted questions. Dressed in a tailored grey suit and dark sunglasses, he wore a stoic mask that revealed no hint of emotion. Inside the courtroom was surprisingly small and modest for such a high-profile case, the wooden pews filled with press and spectators. Evelyn and her lawyer Janet were seated at the prosecution's table. She looked pale and fragile, her eyes downcast, but there was a certain resolve in her posture. Harold glanced at her only briefly as he took his seat beside Bernard Stein. Judge Mary Kingsley presided, an astute woman known for her intolerance of theatrics. She addressed Harold's legal counsel, who motioned for a plea of not guilty. The charges read aloud included felony assault and battery on a pregnant spouse. The words echoed ominously through the hushed room. Prosecutor James Underwood wasted no time presenting the video evidence that had already become infamous. The room fell silent as the footage played. There on the screen was Harold's hand connecting sharply with Evelyn's cheek, her face contorted in pain, the restaurant crowd gasping in the background. Harold swallowed hard, but his expression remained guarded. His attorney argued that it was an isolated incident, fueled by extreme emotional stress, an out-of-character moment for a man who had led a charitable, community-minded life. The prosecution countered that domestic violence could never be excused by stress, especially when an unborn child was at risk. By the time the hearing concluded, it was clear there would be no quick resolution. Trial was set for several weeks later, and the tension in the courtroom felt like a coiled spring about to snap. In the days following the court hearing, Serafina Rossetti found herself in an awkward position. She had assumed that Harold needing her emotional support would whisk her away from the scandal and set her up in some plush hideaway. Instead, she found her calls unanswered or curtly dismissed. The few times Harold did speak to her, he was terse and irritable, as though she were now a complication rather than a thrilling escape. Serafina had her own problems too. Reporters had begun staking out the upscale condo Harold had rented for her. Some tabloids ran sensational headlines like, "The Other Woman." Serafina Rossetti speaks out. Even though she had given no interviews, offers from less reputable media outlets poured in, all wanting her exclusive story. Serafina sensed an opportunity. Perhaps if Harold was going to turn cold, she could profit from this mess in her own way. Despite her interest in monetizing the scandal, Serafina also harbored a flicker of concern for Evelyn. She never anticipated the situation would escalate into physical violence. Yes, she had wanted to supplant Evelyn as the woman in Harold's life, but witnessing a man strike his pregnant wife had jarred her. For the first time, she wondered if she was in over her head. One evening, she decided to contact Evelyn anonymously. She sent a brief, cryptic message. "I'm sorry for what happened. I never wanted it to come to this." She then quickly blocked the number, unsure of why she felt compelled to do so in the first place. That night, she remained awake, perched on her leather sofa, staring at the city lights outside her window. She had spent a lifetime fighting for a better existence, convinced that the ends justified the means. But as she peered into her own future, she suddenly realized she might be standing on a precarious tightrope, one misstep away from losing everything. Harold Davenport's PR team had never faced a crisis of this magnitude. Usually they managed to paint him as a charitable businessman, someone who hosted lavish galas for hospitals, sponsored educational programs, and revitalized run-down neighborhoods. But the video of him striking Evelyn was impossible to spin. The public condemnation was fierce, and major corporate partners began distancing themselves. Stock in Davenport Investments took a nosedive. Shareholders were panicking, and the board of directors discreetly questioned Harold's ability to continue leading the company. Not one to accept defeat, quietly Harold held a meeting in his opulent office suite. The walls were lined with modern art, each piece meticulously chosen to convey sophistication. But on this day, the art's tranquility did nothing to calm the anxieties in the room. Board members, anxious and distrustful, demanded reassurance. Harold paced at the head of the long, polished table, trying to maintain composure. "We need to control the narrative," he insisted. "I've directed my lawyers to talk settlement with Evelyn. We can handle this quietly if she—" One of the older board members, James Chapman, interrupted. "Harold, with all due respect, you assaulted your pregnant wife on camera. There's no controlling that narrative, and if we don't distance ourselves, we risk the downfall of the entire firm." Murmurs of agreement echoed around the table. Harold's jaw tightened. He insisted that the scandal would blow over if they remained united. But the board members exchanged doubtful glances. In the hallways outside, staff whispered uncertain if they'd have a job in a few months. That evening, Harold retreated to his penthouse office. The city skyline spread before him. He clutched a glass of expensive scotch, staring at the reflection of a man he hardly recognized. His empire was teetering, and for the first time in his life, he had no idea how to save it. As Harold's world collapsed, the people in his orbit took sides. A handful of his longtime associates tried to stand by him, offering moral support and private sympathies. Most, however, withdrew out of self-preservation. Invitations to elite events dried up. Charity galas quietly removed his name from the guest lists, and those who once clamored for a seat at his table now avoided him. Evelyn, too, witnessed a shift in her social circle. Friends who had previously envied her lifestyle now reached out with genuine compassion, offering everything from free daycare advice to assistance in navigating the legal system. Fiona remained steadfast, becoming Evelyn's de facto bodyguard against paparazzi and meddling reporters. Meanwhile, the press had a field day, highlighting every single detail of Harold and Evelyn's life. Newspapers dug into Harold's financial dealings, revealing questionable partnerships and uncompleted real estate ventures. Speculative pieces claimed Davenport Investments was on the brink of bankruptcy. Journalists camped outside Fiona's suburban estate, snapping photos through telephoto lenses whenever Evelyn ventured outdoors for a doctor's appointment or a walk. Harold was enraged by the intrusion, even though he had no moral ground to stand on. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he asked Bernard Stein, "Is there any chance Evelyn will drop the charges?" Stein's expression was grim. "She's pressing forward. And the DA's office has ample evidence. If it goes to trial, you could face jail time, especially considering the severity of hitting a pregnant woman." Faced with the real possibility of incarceration, Harold felt the first tremors of fear. He was used to controlling everything. His company, his reputation, his personal relationships. But now the grip he had on his world was slipping, and all he could do was watch it fall. Evelyn spent her days juggling medical checkups with legal consultations. The unborn child remained her top priority, and each ultrasound brought both hope and anxiety. Would the baby sense the stress roiling through her? She tried to soothe her mind with prenatal yoga recommended by her therapist. The sessions offered brief respite, but the looming trial kept her nerves on edge. Her therapist, Dr. Anita Green, encouraged her to confront not just the slap, but all the emotional abuse and neglect she'd experienced in the marriage. In one session, Evelyn sobbed as she recounted the nights she would wait hours on end for Harold to return home, only to be met with indifference or scorn. She realized that the violent act at La Belle Étoile was just the tip of a dangerous iceberg, and recognizing this made her simultaneously furious and fearful. Meanwhile, Harold's lawyers tried multiple strategies, proposing a private reconciliation, dangling a generous financial settlement, and even floating the idea of joint public statements about marital discord. Each offer was swiftly rejected. Evelyn was no longer the timid spouse who would do anything to keep the peace. The baby changed everything for her, instilling a fierce resolve to ensure a better future, free from deceit and fear. Late at night, Evelyn lay awake in Fiona's guest bed, replaying the slap in her mind. She saw Harold's eyes burning with rage, felt the sting on her cheek anew. For the first time, she truly comprehended the fragility of her own existence and her child's. She had loved Harold once deeply, but she couldn't excuse what he'd done. In that dark stillness, she resolved to see this through to the end, no matter how daunting the road might be. As the trial date approached, both sides engaged in a flurry of legal maneuvers. Bernard Stein filed motions to suppress certain witness testimonies and to dispute the chain of custody for the restaurant video. The prosecution, led by James Underwood, countered with motions of their own, seeking to highlight Harold's history of emotional neglect and to call Serafina Rossetti as a witness. Serafina found herself in a precarious position. She had no desire to appear in court, especially knowing that the defense would paint her as a gold-digging mistress. Yet she also sensed an opportunity to exact some form of revenge on Harold for discarding her so callously once the scandal erupted. After consulting with a lawyer of her own, Serafina begrudgingly agreed to cooperate with the prosecution's subpoena. The court of public opinion, however, was far swifter. The tabloids labeled Serafina as a home wrecker and the vamp who lured Harold astray. Commentators on morning talk shows debated whether she deserved blame or sympathy. Serafina found the sudden fame both alluring and terrifying, as she realized her once private life was now fodder for gossip and judgment. Inside Davenport Investments, the board of directors held emergency sessions without Harold. Rumors circulated about a possible ousting. Harold heard whispers about a management shakeup that would remove him as CEO. Each time the rumor reached him, it fanned the flames of his anger. He felt betrayed by the very people who had benefited from his leadership for years. Still, he clung to the hope that the trial might reveal the situation as a one-time lapse in judgment, at least enough to salvage what remained of his empire. But in his darkest moments, he wondered if the unstoppable Harold Davenport was truly unstoppable after all. Amid the swirling chaos, Evelyn received unexpected support from a group called Women First, a local non-profit dedicated to assisting victims of domestic violence. Organized by a determined activist named Sarah Hernandez, they reached out to Evelyn, offering counseling, legal resources, and even security if she felt threatened. Though initially wary of involving outsiders, Evelyn discovered a comforting sense of solidarity in their presence. Harold, in a rare moment of contrition, attempted to send Evelyn a bouquet of white roses and a handwritten note saying, "For the sake of our child, let's find a peaceful resolution." Evelyn never responded. She handed the note to her lawyer, who added it to the growing file of communications, unsure if it might be a ploy to manipulate the legal proceedings. Around the same time, a former employee of Davenport Investments named Marcus Lee came forward sharing that Harold had once verbally abused him in a private meeting. Marcus provided an affidavit describing Harold as a tyrant prone to explosive temper tantrums whenever challenged. While this testimony wasn't directly linked to Evelyn's assault, it added to the damning portrait of a man with little regard for those around him. Evelyn started to wonder if she ever truly knew Harold at all. She had been entranced by his charm, his success, and the beautiful life he offered. Perhaps she had been just another piece in his carefully curated public image. This realization fueled her resolve for justice. She began to understand that the trial was about more than just a single slap. It was about holding Harold accountable for a pattern of abuse. Late at night, she wrote in her journal, "I'm not fighting just for me. I'm fighting for every woman who's been silenced by fear, every child who deserves a loving home, and the future I want for my baby." The courtroom buzzed like a hive on the first morning of the trial. Long before the doors opened, reporters crowded the courthouse steps, their breath fogging in the early morning chill. News vans lined the curb like battle tanks, their antennas pointed to the sky. Inside every seat was filled lawyers, journalists, court staff, and a few silent strangers who just wanted to witness a man of power finally face justice. Evelyn sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture dignified but tense. She wore a simple navy dress and minimal makeup. She didn't need embellishment. The faint bruise along her jaw had faded, but the memory it carried still throbbed beneath the surface. Her lawyer, Janet Morales, sat beside her, focused, calm, and determined. Across the room, Harold Davenport entered, flanked by Bernard Stein and a second attorney. His navy suit was crisp, his hair carefully styled, but he looked thinner than before, his jaw tighter, his eyes a shade duller. The cameras had captured his fall from grace for weeks, but here under oath there would be no curated image, only truth. Judge Mary Kingsley entered promptly, the courtroom rising in unison. She surveyed the room with a cool, measured gaze before nodding to the attorneys. "Let us begin. James Underwood." The prosecutor stood and launched into a piercing opening statement. "This case is not about business. It's not about society pages or philanthropy. It's about a woman, a wife, struck in public while pregnant. It's about a man who believed his wealth would shield him from consequence. But in this courtroom, we are all equal under the law." His words settled into the silence like weights dropped into water. When Stein took his turn, his tone was somber. "Davenport is not a monster. He's a man under immense pressure who made a terrible mistake. We will show that this was an isolated incident, not a pattern. A moment of emotional failure, not cruelty." The real moment began when Evelyn was called to the stand. She walked slowly, every step echoing in the wood-paneled chamber. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down, clutching a tissue in her lap. Underwood guided her through the beginning, her marriage, the pregnancy, and the night of the incident. "I walked into the restaurant," Evelyn said, her voice low but steady, "and saw my husband laughing with another woman. I was humiliated. But more than that, I was scared. Scared because when I confronted him, he didn't apologize. He hit me." She paused, blinking back tears. It wasn't just the slap. It was the way he looked at me. Like I was the problem. Like I deserved it. The jury sat motionless. Some jurors looked at her with open empathy. Others scribbled quietly. During cross-examination, Stein treaded carefully. Mrs. Davenport, would you say your marriage had challenges before this night? Evelyn nodded. All marriages do. But challenges don't excuse violence. Stein pressed further, attempting to imply her presence at the restaurant was confrontational. You showed up uninvited, emotional upset. Is it possible things escalated too quickly? Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't even hesitate. That was not escalation. That was a choice. Silence followed. Even Stein backed off, realizing he was dangerously close to pushing the jury the wrong way. As court adjourned for the day, Fiona met Evelyn in the hallway and wrapped her arms around her. You did it, she whispered. You told the truth. Reporters leaned over the barricades, microphones extended, but Evelyn kept her eyes on the door ahead. She hadn't walked out with justice yet, but she had walked in with courage. And that was the first step in reclaiming her story. The second day of trial began under a grey, unsettled sky. Inside the courthouse, a palpable sense of anticipation gripped every corner. Reporters lined the marble steps outside, speculating on what might come next. Everyone was talking about the witness expected to take the stand, Serafina Rossetti. She arrived at the courthouse in a dark sedan with tinted windows. Gone were the plunging necklines and camera-ready smiles. Today, Serafina wore a sleek black dress with long sleeves and her hair pulled back into a tight bun. The look was deliberate, composed, restrained, almost somber. The court bailiff led her through the back entrance, but not before a few quick shutter clicks from alert photographers caught her profile. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. As Serafina walked down the aisle to the witness stand, Evelyn kept her gaze straight ahead, jaw tight. Fiona, seated beside her, offered a comforting squeeze of the hand. Across the room, Harold shifted in his seat, eyes unreadable. Prosecutor James Underwood began slowly. Ms. Rossetti, thank you for being here. Could you tell the court how you first met Mr. Davenport? Serafina's voice was low but clear. We met at the Grand Regent Hotel lounge. I was singing at the piano bar. He approached me after my set. And when did the relationship become romantic? Serafina hesitated. A few weeks later. He said he was unhappy in his marriage. I believed him. The gallery murmured. Underwood pressed gently. Can you describe Harold's demeanor during your time together? He was intense, controlling in subtle ways, but also charming. He made grand gestures, lavish dinners, gifts, but when things didn't go his way, his temper flared. She glanced briefly at Harold, especially the night at La Belle Étoile. Underwood nodded. Can you describe what you witnessed that night? Serafina inhaled. He was already tense before Evelyn arrived. He called her names, said she was always nagging him about the baby. When she showed up, he panicked. But what shocked me most was how quickly the slap came. 1 second, he was glaring. The next, he struck her. There was no hesitation. Gasps echoed through the room. Harold's eyes darkened, his jaw tight. Bernard Stein stood for cross-examination. Ms. Rossetti, he began coolly. How long have you known the prosecution intended to call you as a witness? A few weeks, she replied. During that time, did you speak to any media outlets? No. Did you consider selling your story? No, she said, a slight edge to her voice. But you must be aware that your name is now trending online. The mistress who helped take down Harold Davenport. That has value, does it not? Serafina didn't flinch. I didn't come here for value. I came to tell the truth. Isn't it true you continued seeing Mr. Davenport, even after knowing he was married? Yes, she said, her tone sharp now. But I never expected to witness violence. That changed everything. Stein backed off, sensing the jury was leaning toward her. She had delivered more than testimony. She had added depth to the prosecution's portrait of Harold as a man who didn't just lose his temper, but simmered with rage beneath the surface. Next came Marcus Lee, the former Davenport Investments employee. A young man in his early 30s, Marcus spoke with nervous energy. He recounted an incident where Harold screamed at him in a closed-door meeting and threatened to end his career over a missed contract clause. It was just paperwork, Marcus said, but he exploded. I walked out that day and never looked back. Though not directly tied to the incident with Evelyn Marcus's account, bolstered the image of a man who used intimidation as a tool. By the end of day 2, the prosecution had laid out a pattern, not one of a single mistake, but of a man whose power insulated him from consequences until now. As the judge adjourned for the day, Evelyn caught Serafina's eye just briefly. For a fleeting second, there was no animosity between them, just the silent acknowledgement of a shared wound. By the 3rd day of trial, tension gripped the courtroom like a coiled spring. The prosecution had delivered a series of powerful testimonies, from Evelyn's haunting account to Serafina's damning implications, and now the defense was left with a singular risky strategy: put Harold on the stand. Bernard Stein wasn't fully confident in the decision, but Harold had insisted. He believed his voice could sway the jury, that his carefully practiced charm and narrative of stress and misjudgment might tilt the scales in his favor. After all, he had talked his way out of worse, or so he thought. The courtroom hushed as Harold rose, straightening his blazer and taking measured steps toward the witness box. The judge nodded. "You may proceed." He took a breath and began. "I grew up with nothing," Harold said, eyes flicking to the jury. "A 1-bedroom apartment, a single mother who worked 2 jobs. I built everything I have through hard work and sacrifice. I've created homes for thousands, jobs for hundreds. I've supported charities, sponsored programs. My life has been about more than just profit." His voice was steady, each word calculated. "But with success comes pressure. The past year has been overwhelming. Cracks in the company boardroom, betrayals, business partners fleeing. It felt like my world was slipping. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't thinking clearly. That night," I snapped. He paused dramatically, letting the silence thicken. "I never meant to hurt Evelyn. It was a moment of weakness. I regret it with every part of me." A murmur spread through the gallery. Some nodded sympathetically. Others remained unmoved, arms crossed, expressions stony. Then came the cross-examination. Prosecutor James Underwood stood, his tone clipped. "Mr. Davenport, you described a moment of weakness. Do you believe pressure excuses striking your pregnant wife?" Harold stiffened. "I didn't say it excuses it. I said it explains it." Underwood's eyes narrowed. "You were calm enough to order an expensive bottle of wine. You were composed enough to laugh with your mistress, to pose for photos. But when your wife appeared uninvited, as you put it, you lost control." Harold's face tightened. It wasn't just her presence. It was the scene she caused. She was confronting you, Underwood pressed, not for cheating, but for betraying the vows you made while carrying your child. Isn't it true you struck her not because of stress, but because she shattered your illusion of control? Objection. Overruled. Harold hesitated, clearly flustered. I felt cornered. Underwood stepped forward, voice firm. Do you understand the risk you posed that night? Not just to Evelyn, but to your unborn child. Had she fallen, hit her head, lost the baby, would it still have been a lapse? The room fell into complete stillness. Harold's throat bobbed. Of course not. I regret it. Regret doesn't erase action, Mr. Davenport, Underwood said sharply, especially when that action is a violent assault. Stein winced slightly from the defense table. Harold's carefully built narrative was unraveling under the prosecutor's precision. After stepping down, Harold returned to his seat, visibly shaken. He leaned toward Stein, whispering something urgent. But his attorney's silence spoke louder than words. The damage had been done. In an effort to salvage the moment, the defense presented a slideshow of Harold's philanthropic endeavors, ribbon cuttings, charity auctions, photos of him handing oversized checks to children's hospitals. But to the jury, these gestures felt disconnected, like hollow set pieces in a life too carefully staged. From the gallery, Evelyn watched quietly, her fingers resting on her belly. The man on the screen, the smiling public hero, was not the man who had slapped her in front of a room full of strangers, not the man who had abandoned her emotionally long before that night ever occurred. As the day ended, Judge Kingsley announced that closing arguments would be heard the following morning. The jury would soon render their verdict. Outside, cameras whirred and anchors rehearsed their lines. Inside, Harold Davenport sat still, staring straight ahead. For the first time, he looked like a man who didn't know what came next. The courtroom felt like a pressure chamber ready to burst. After 5 days of emotional testimony, war confessions, damning footage, and countless objections, the air was electric with anticipation. Every seat was filled, even the overflow rooms packed with journalists and spectators watching via monitors. Evelyn sat flanked by her attorney, Janet Morales, and Fiona, who gripped her hand tightly. Her breathing was slow, measured, her eyes distant, as if she were trying to float above the gravity of the moment. At the defense table, Harold sat unusually still. Gone was the arrogant tilt of his chin, the impervious glint in his eyes. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, fingers interlocked, knuckles pale. Bernard Stein leaned in and whispered something, but Harold gave no indication he'd heard. His gaze was locked forward, staring into a future he could no longer control. The jury filed in each face, solemn, many avoiding Harold's eyes. The foreperson, a woman in her 40s, with firm posture and a trembling sheet of paper in hand, stood at the judge's cue. In the case of the state versus Harold Davenport, she began, her voice slightly cracking under the weight of the moment. On the charge of felony assault on a pregnant spouse, we find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by stunned silence. Harold's body jolted, his shoulders dropping, as if the word had pierced something vital inside him. Stein placed a firm hand on his arm, a silent, grounding gesture. The weight of the verdict hung thick in the air. Judge Kingsley's gavel struck once, commanding attention. Sentencing will be scheduled in a separate hearing. Court is adjourned. As the room stirred back to life, murmurs, whispers, and camera clicks erupted like distant thunder. But Evelyn heard none of it. Her eyes welled with tears, a silent flood of emotion, too complex for words' relief, vindication, heartbreak, and grief all mingling at once. She pressed her hand to her belly, whispering a silent vow of safety and strength to the child within. Harold remained seated for a moment longer, staring blankly ahead. Then, as deputies approached to escort him out for legal processing, he finally turned. His eyes met Evelyn's across the room. They held each other's gaze for a beat, hers steady, unwavering, his clouded with disbelief, perhaps even sorrow. But no words passed between them. In that final glance, something unsaid passed, a recognition that everything they had built was gone, shattered by the strike of a hand and the unraveling of trust. Whatever future Harold imagined, it would no longer include control, reputation, or redemption on his terms. Outside the courthouse, the press surged forward, but Evelyn remained shielded by Janet and Fiona. Sarah Hernandez from Women First stood nearby, offering a warm, silent smile of support. Evelyn looked up at the sky, the sun breaking through a blanket of clouds, and for the first time in months, she exhaled without tension. She had done the unthinkable, stood up to a powerful man, not for revenge, but for her child, for herself, for every woman who had ever been told to stay silent. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, co-parenting, healing, rebuilding, it was hers to walk now free of fear. The verdict wasn't just a ruling, it was a rebirth. And so ends the saga of the millionaire whose pride and betrayal sparked a dramatic courtroom reckoning. Harold Davenport, once considered invincible, now faces the very real consequences of his choices. Meanwhile, Evelyn stands as a testament to courage, showing that even in the darkest hours, hope and justice can prevail. As she places a protective hand over her growing belly, she looks toward a future in which her child will never know the weight of fear or silence. If this story moved you, if you found yourself rooting for justice and resolution, please let us know by hitting the like button. Share it with your friends to spark important conversations about accountability and empathy. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling tales that shine a light on the complexities of human relationships. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.